Good evening. We are starting the panel. Thank you very much for coming, for joining us this evening at this panel, which is part of this year's Mediterranean Theological Meetings. As every year, we have this event when we invite the guests, the professors who are lecturing, when we invite them to Rijeka, and we have a panel opportunity for them and for you, the audience, to hear them, to be part of the Mediterranean Theological Meetings. This year, we mark 1,700 years from the Nicaea Council, and also we mark 60 years since the closure of the Second Vatican Council. So it's the year of great anniversaries, at least in Christian churches. That is why the topic of this year's Mediterranean Theological Meetings is how and what are the challenges of theology nowadays. When we mark big anniversaries, always we wonder, we question, okay, how should those things, how should those events that took part a long time ago, how should we understand them nowadays, how should we be inspired by them? That's the topic of our talks in Lovran in these days, and we are very happy to be here, very grateful to Bishop Mate Uzinic, who is hosting us with his collaborators also this year in this place, so we will be able to discuss with you, with the audience, on these topics. I would like to start with the question for Professor Lejla Demiri, who is Professor of Islamic Dogmatics and Executive Director of the Center for Islamic Theology at the University of Tübingen. Professor Lejla, you have really rich and broad experience of religious reality in many countries, in Albania, in Italy, in Germany, also in Croatia, also here, also in other countries. So you really have big experience, and now you're teaching in Germany, in Tübingen. And in these days, we are discussing about these contemporary challenges that theology faces. So could you introduce us into this topic from your point of view? What are the main challenges for the theology today?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your gracious introduction. First of all, also, I would like to start with expressing my gratefulness to the Archbishop of Rijeka, Mate Uzinic, for giving us this opportunity to gather together in Lovran, but also in Rijeka. And this is of special and personal, on a personal note, this is a special occasion for me because not far away from here, on the island of Kirk, I used to spend happy childhood days. And also, we as family used to come to Rijeka to attend our Friday prayers in the mosque, which used to be in the old city center. So I have that special connection to this location, and I'm so happy that I'm given this opportunity to come here to share a little bit of some of the experiences that I've had in the journey of my theological training, but also of my theological experience of talking to the religious other, talking and encountering Christians and talking about theology together. So coming back to your question about what are the main challenges today, I can think of three major challenges. Of course, for theologians, we can talk about almost everything, and everything can be a topic for us. We can theologize about any possible matter. But there are three major matters that I think are important for today's globalized world. One of them is, of course, climate change. The other one is artificial intelligence, and the third one is about the encounter of different faith traditions. So we, as theologians, we have a duty of promoting practical, religion-based responses to climate change and AI, artificial intelligence, and also building bridges with other faith traditions. And we know that when it comes to the climate change, in recent years, there have been various initiatives, theological initiatives in different religious traditions. But in the last few years, I would like to say that theologians from different traditions have been getting together more and more, talking from their religious perspective, the situation in terms of climate change. And this is one of the areas that I've been also very much involved. And I could mention the conference that I organized a few years ago on green theology and Christian Muslim perspectives on green theology, which then emerged as a publication. But also a lot more can be done about that. Of course, I'm talking as a theologian at the theory and theological part, but also the practical and religion-based responses would be important. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, I guess the topic is a lot more complicated there. A lot needs to be unpacked and learned. And in all areas of human life, I think this is one of the topics to be discussed, not just in theology, but also overall humanities. Many universities are now talking about setting up some regulations of the use of artificial intelligence. This is one example, including my own university. And when it comes to the third topic about encountering the other, of course, in today's complex and often uncomfortably globalized world, there is an evident and growing need for a mutual theological hospitality, a term that is coined by the contemporary Catholic scholar of Islam, Daniel Madigan, who used to be my supervisor at Gregoriana Pontifical Gregorian University when I studied there. So this is characterized as doing theology in the presence of the other and together with the other. And of course, this requires the creation or reinstatement of a platform where we do theology in the presence of and in conversation with our Abrahamic neighbors. It is in fact an effort that goes beyond interfaith studies and beyond comparative theology. And this is precisely how one would describe the relationship that we have forged at the Center for Islamic Theology, University of Tübingen, where I am based, with our neighboring colleagues and theologians from the Catholic and Protestant theologies. We co-teach various courses together. We do research together, and very often when we teach and when we speak, our audience is very diverse. We have Islamic theology students, we have Catholic students, Protestant students, and beyond, and other students. Of course, the vital lesson that we learn is that religions do not talk to each other, but their individual followers do. And no one remains untouched and unchanged by the challenges and rewards and the science of human conviviality around God's table, which are gifted by such encounters. So what is really important for us is, in our conversations, basically to improve the quality of our disagreements. I should stop here.
Thank you. I find your answer very interesting, especially when it comes to ecological crisis and artificial intelligence, because, well, at least maybe in our context of Southeast Europe, in our religious context, maybe we're still getting used to those topics. They are not still at the center of our attention, but as you were saying, certainly they are of high importance, and I believe they will come to the center of our attention. And that's why one of the great richnesses of these theological encounters is to have professors from different backgrounds, different contexts, different realities, One of our guests is Professor Johanna Gustafsson Lundberg, who is Professor of Ethics at the Center of Theology and Religious Studies of the Lund University in Sweden. When we think of Sweden, we think, usually at least here in Eastern Europe, of reality and a society that is very much secularized, that is very much undogmatic. And I think it would be interesting to hear about that reality, that is, what should a role of theology be in a context like that? Because also here we are facing increasing secularity, decline of importance of the teaching of the church, and it scares us, to be honest, sometimes a bit. But then when we look at Sweden, at countries that are up there in the north, it's something completely different, and I think certainly we can learn also from your experiences. So what would you say, what is the role of theology and theologians in a context like that?
Thank you for this very both important and intriguing question. And before I come to this question on how theology can contribute, so to speak, to today's challenges, let me just nuance or maybe share why Sweden in all sorts of surveys come out as this very secularized country, which is in one way so true, but the picture can be complicated. The answer to this is are Swedes secularized is yes and no, depending on really what we mean. The answer yes is if you would pose the question like this: are you Christian or are you religious? Most certainly you would get a very hesitant answer. No, or maybe yeah, maybe not. But if you would pose the questions in something like if they are spiritually interested, the answers would be very different. You would probably hear people talking about the importance of coming out in nature, experiencing something larger than life, something that goes beyond human perceptions. And maybe even someone would talk about a force or approaching some kind of idea of aspects of life that we cannot grasp or understand by natural sciences, if I say so. So that would be the one no answer. The other is, and this is sociologically, I think, an interesting paradox. Church of Sweden, it's a Lutheran theological majority church, a former state church. So just a decade ago, a majority of the Swedish population would be members of Church of Sweden. Today, with an increased secularization and decreasing numbers in terms of membership, still 5.4 million people are members of Church of Sweden. And our whole population today is 10.2 million. So it's like half of our populations that are members in the church. And of course, there have been all sorts of comments and tries to understand what is this about. And I think that these numbers, they don't tell you anything really about church activity or going regularly to the Sunday sermon. Rather, it tells you something about what a British sociologist once labeled as believing in belonging. It's a point, there is a point here that relates to ideas of belonging and supporting. I may not pray myself, I may not believe in Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. But at the end of the day, I'm happy with the fact that someone is praying for me, that someone is taking this responsibility. So this is just to complicate the idea of secularization. Second then, the question of theology. I think since Sweden is not this solitary nation up in the north anymore, we are part of a global discussion, a global mobility. We meet new groups of people that cherish religious practices from different kinds. So I think theology is severely needed to increase religious literacy in a secularized context. Because it's very easy to remain comfortably with this modern idea that religious is something private. This is not something that we discuss in public. This is your own business, mind your own business. But now we have many, many questions on the political and public agenda that really has to do with religious matters. And we need to deal with this in qualified ways. And I see a huge responsibility here for theologians, both academically, but also all of us who are part of or attend some kind of religious community.
Thank you. I find it really interesting this fact that until recently you had a state church, but on the other hand, you are, at least from our point of view, quite secularized. Here we have also a professor who is really an expert for this relation between church and the nation. And before presenting him, we will skip to Croatian and Serbian. So those that don't speak those languages, please now use your devices, because the next two questions and the answers will be in Croatian and Serbian language. Profesor Vladan Perišić je umirovljeni profesor filozofije i patrologije na Pravoslavnom bogoslovskom fakultetu Sveučilišta u Beogradu. Profesore, u našem kontekstu jugoistočne Europe vjera je poprilično povezana s etničkim identitetom. Vjerujem da postoje neke prednosti, ali i neke mane te veze. Koje su to bile prednosti i mane po vašem mišljenju i kako da teolog i vjernik ne padne u tu zamku poistovjećivanja vjere i
Nacionalizam se, kao što znate, pojavio posle Francuske revolucije i u sljedećih 150 godina imao je pozitivnu ulogu u oslobađanju naroda od autokratskih vladara i njihove samovolje, pa i nekih kolonizatora nekih drugih naroda. Nacionalizam se tada zalagao da narod bude suveren i da njemu, a ne nekom naslednom vladaru ili stranom osvojaču, pripada moć kojom će preko svojih predstavnika upravljati državom. Međutim, ne vjerujem da me Stanko pita o tome nešto, nego o nacionalizmu o kojem je posljednjih 100 godina pa i danas riječ. O tome, to je nešto o čemu treba da razmišljamo i raspravljamo. A taj nacionalizam, ovaj novi, nije tako nov, ali je nov u odnosu na onaj izvorni, je kratko rečeno jedno nekritičko i neutemeljeno veličanje sopstvene nacije, obično na račun ostalih, pri čemu se tvrdo insistira da oduvijek postojimo mi i oni, što je izmišljotina, i da je naš nacionalizam patriotizam, a njihov nacionalizam je šovinizam. Nacionalizam te vrste gaji mnoge mitove. Jedan od njih je mit o sopstvenoj naciji kao paćeniku i žrtvi izloženoj povijesnim nepravdama, koje je danas naravno potrebno ispraviti i naravno na račun onog drugog. Nacionalizam također njeguje i mit o čistom, izvornom narodu koji postoji od pamtivijeka i čiji je prirodni nastavljač i potomak nacija kojoj pripadamo. Nacionalizam njeguje i mit da nacije postoje po prirodi, jel? Mada je suvremena znanost ubjedljivo pokazala da su moderne nacije u stvari društvene konstrukcije. I tako dalje, i tako dalje. E sad, takvoj jednoj konstrukciji, modernoj naciji, političke elite, ja bih te elite stavio pod znake navoda, dodijelile su ulogu čuvara nacije ili čuvara nacionalnog jedinstva. I tako crkva, koja je radosno prihvatila tu ulogu, kojom ona u suštini ne bi trebalo da ima nikakve veze, ali je prigrlila, se javlja kao nacionalna crkva. No ne samo što nacionalno jedinstvo ne može postojati drugčije nego kao diskurzivni konstrukt, trebalo bi vremena da se objasni zašto, sad ga nemamo, nego čak i kad bi bilo moguće ili poželjno, to nipošto ne bi smio biti zadatak crkve. Međutim, kažem, crkva je taj zadatak prihvatila sa oduševljenjem i počela ga opravdavati svim sredstvima. No, pošto ga nije mogla opravdati crkvenom teologijom, opravdava ga crkvenom ideologijom. Moramo biti svjesni da u crkvi, pored teologije, postoji i ideologija. I u tom, rekao bi, nečasnom zadatku uspjela je do te mjere da je hrišćane uvjerila da je to nešto samorazumljivo i neupitno, da oni treba da budu čuvari čistote nacije i nacionalnog jedinstva. Iako ništa nije pogrešnije od toga. Zašto? Pa zato što identitet hrišćana ne bi smio proizlaziti iz nacije, nego isključivo od Isusa Hrista. Jedino je on taj koji hrišćaninu može dati njegov hrišćanski identitet. Krštenjem se do duše ne gubi činjenica da neko rođenjem pripada nekoj naciji. Svako ostaje ono što je i bio, ali ta činjenica gubi na značaju, gubi na težini. Postaje potpuno irelevantna, poput recimo boje kose ili očiju. Kad se krstite, ne promijeni vam se boja kose, niti boja očiju, niti to da ste rođeni u ovoj ili onoj naciji. Ali to od tog časa pa nadalje, ukoliko krštenje shvatite ozbiljno, prestaje da vam daje svaki identitet. I to ne samo nacionalni, nego čak i kulturni. Dakle, on ne iščezava, ali gubi na značaju kad se uporedi sa novim identitetom koji dobijamo na krštenju. A taj novi hrišćanski identitet ne može počivati na rasi, klasi, naciji, pa ni na tradiciji ili kulturi. On počiva isključivo na živom Bogočovjeku, raspetom i vaskrslom. Svaki drugi identitet, isključivo nacionalni, kome bi jedan hrišćanin težio, ne bi bio ništa drugo nego izdaja Hrista. Vidite, krštenjem i miropomazanjem Duhom Svetim, a ne palim duhovima ovoga svijeta, mi prestajemo da budemo Grci i Židovi, kako to fino kaže apostol Pavle, već odmah u 1. stoljeću, da ne bismo posle imali nekih zabuda. Prestajemo da budemo Srbi i Hrvati, prestajemo da budemo Francuzi i Rusi i tako dalje. I postajemo samo i isključivo hrišćani, djeca Božja, braća i sestre jednoga Boga. Upravo zato mi jesmo sablazan ovoga svijeta. Jer iako smo u ovom svijetu, mi ne bi trebalo da smo od ovoga svijeta. Ako u ovom svijetu nismo sablazan po ovom pitanju, onda smo se mi ovom svijetu toliko prilagodili da sa našim hrišćanstvom nešto nije u redu. Dakle, krštenjem mi postajemo djeca Božja, djeca Boga ljubavi, Boga pravde, Boga milosti, Boga mira, a ne Boga podjela i mržnje, Boga nacionalnih identiteta i ostalih konstrukcija. Kao slobodna bića, a Bog nam je dao da budemo slobodni, jer tvrdi da smo mi slike živoga Boga, mi u stvari moramo izabrati. Ili će nam identitet davati nacija, ili će nam identitet davati Isus Hristos. I nemojmo sebe zavaravati da možemo izabrati oba. Eto, hvala za sad.
Hvala, profesore. Evo i publika je zadovoljna odgovorom. Zanimljivo mi je kada spominjete socijalnu konstrukciju zbilje. Nekada ili najčešće ta socijalna konstrukcija zbilje ide ruku pod ruku i sa povijesnom konstrukcijom zbilje. Ove godine imamo kao gosta predavača jednog stručnjaka za povijest, povjesničara, crkvenog povjesničara Marka Medveda, koji predaje na Medicinskom fakultetu Sveučilišta u Rijeci. A uz obljetnice koje sam na početku spomenuo, ove godine Hrvati slave, obilježavaju i 1100 godina Hrvatskog kraljevstva. I Katolička crkva je aktivna u obilježavanju ove obljetnice, premda s druge strane nam povjesničari govore kako je ta obljetnica u nekim aspektima i sporna. I postoji određena zanimljiva debata oko tog pitanja. Pa evo, profesore Medved, kako vi kao vjernik, kao povjesničar, kao teolog gledate na tu situaciju?
Evo, dobro večer. Uistinu ti sabori u Splitu 925. i 928. su bili važni povijesni događaji. Da samo spomenem da je posljedica, da je višestoljetna posljedica zaključaka tih sabora bila u biti integracija dalmatinske obale sa hrvatskim zaleđem. Da sad ne držim predavanje, govorio sam dugo godina mojim studentima o tim saborima. Dakle, kao povjesničar uistinu kažem da, uistinu su važni u našoj i crkvenoj povijesti i nacionalnoj povijesti ti sabori. Doduše, evo, kao crkveni povjesničar i kao osoba koja voli povijest, ipak se usudim reći da je moja crkva nekako ipak odveć zagledana u povijest, možda jer se možda boji sadašnjosti i jer se možda boji budućnosti. Kada gledam kako se je obilježilo na razne načine se obilježavalo i znanstvenim putem i liturgijskim i drugim putem i u javnom prostoru. Onda bih nekako mogao reći da je dobar dio ili možda čak i dominantan dio obilježavanja tih obljetnica išao u smjeru sakraliziranja nacionalnoga. Umjesto da crkveni povjesničari pomognu, kao što si postavio u pitanju, sazrijevanju u našem odnosu prema tim mitovima, prema tim mitologemima. Ne samo u našem narodu, nego i u drugim evropskim narodima, u tom ranom srednjem vijeku. Pitanje pokrštavanja i druga vjerska pitanja su usko povezana i sa političkim pitanjem. Pokrštavanje u tome vremenu imalo je i čimbenik integriranja na nekome prostoru. Dakle, bilo je vrlo povezano sa političkim pitanjem. To što sam rekao imam dojam da se dogodila sakralizacija Tomislava oko kojega mnogo toga ne znamo, iako mnogo toga je sporno i pitanje krunjenja i neke druge stvari, možda je to prilika da se još jednom ponovi nešto što je već puno puta rečeno, ali očito ima potrebe da se to ponovi. Ne treba miješati nacionalno pripadanje i vjerski identitet. Ja članom crkve postajem krštenjem, a članom nacionalne zajednice rođenjem. Volim citirati jednog teologa pokojnoga, pa ću to učiniti ovdje, to je bio Tomislav Janko Šage-Bunić, koji kaže da kršćanstvo transcendira narode, ono stvara jedinstvo koje nije nacionalno jedinstvo, jer je kršćanstvo stvarnost višeg reda, koje prelazi sve narode, sabire svoje članove iz svih naroda, čija domovina nije ovdje na zemlji, nego prema njoj putuje. Crkva, po mom mišljenju, ne bi trebala povijesne obljetnice obilježavati na način na koji to čine odsjeci za povijest ili pak instituti za povijest. Na kraju krajeva crkvena povijest je polje teologije. Iako ima zajedničko sa civilnom poviješću to da se temelji samo na vrelima. Ja ne mogu reći ništa više od onoga što je u izvorima, u vrelima. No, dakle, crkvena povijest je dio polje teologije. Pa onda, kakav bi to bio pristup kršćanina ili kakav bi to trebao biti pristup kršćanina i crkve prema prošlosti, prema povijesti? U biti bi crkvena povijest, ukoliko teologija želi biti znanost spasenja, ono što se kaže scientia salutis, ukoliko to želi biti, onda bi ona trebala povijest koristiti kao pomagalo da bude sposobna čovjeku našeg vremena prereći onu objavu koju baštini, ali preformulirati je da bi je taj čovjek, konkretno čovjek 2025. u njegovoj konkretnom povijesnom momentu mogao čut, razumjeti i prihvatiti. Da bi tome bilo tako, onda tu dolazi na scenu taj pojam znakova vremena, kojega mi vrednujemo tamo od sredine 20. stoljeća i Gaudium et Spes kaže da crkva ima zadaću ispitivati znakove vremena i tumačiti ih u svjetlu evanđelja. Znači, drugim riječima, po meni bi povijest trebala pomoć u aktualizaciji evanđeoske poruke uz pomoć znakova vremena, koji ne tumače samo sadašnjost, nego tumače i ono što je bilo, ono što je prošlo. Zato, jer ako smo vjernici, ja mislim da bismo trebali biti uvjereni u to da nam Bog ne progovara samo kroz evanđelje, kroz objavu, nego nam progovara i kroz povijest.
Hvala lijepa. Sada ćemo se ponovno prebaciti na engleski jezik, pa bih one koji imaju potrebu zamolio da uključe svoje uređaje. It was very interesting how you were highlighting the need to rephrase the revelation that we received according to the needs of our time, of our culture. We have with us in these days also Professor Sergio Massironi, who is Professor of Theology at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Italy. And the question that I would like to ask him goes exactly in this direction. Also, the title of this edition of Mediterranean Theological Meetings is From Dogma to Dialogue. So how do you see that relation of dogma and dialogue? Is one more important than the other? Is one possible without the other? How to, as Marko was mentioning, rephrase the revelation, the dogma, according to our needs, our culture, our time?
Thank you very much. I think, yes, there is absolutely a primacy of dialogue, of dogma. Dialogue is possible without dogma, and dogma is a part of a great history of dialogue. So we have now, as a part of this history, also dogma, but the life of Jesus is a life of dialogue. The revelation is a dialogical revelation, and the life of God is a dialogical life. That's the primacy of dialogue. In the Gospel, the expert of dogma, since the first chapter of the more ancient Gospel, the Gospel of March, is the devil. The devil is the great dogmatic in the Gospel who define Jesus, and this is evil itself, because Jesus doesn't want to be defined before his death on the cross. Only a stranger, the centurion, can at that moment recognize him after and inside a path. So the life of Jesus is dialogue because he encounters people. He is moved by people. For example, the Syrophoenician woman, the Samaritan, his disciples, themselves. Revelation is a dialogical revelation. Dei Verbum presents us the revelation as a research of relationship, of friendship by God with us. And the inner life, this is the topic of the Trinity, the unity of God is a communal unity. And so dogma is a part of a story of transmission of this kind of revelation, and it appears to be necessary when the very center of this revelation was in any case ambiguous, and was to be saved. To come back to dialogue together with the same experience of God to be transmitted. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. I thank you all, in fact, for this first round of answers. You were really, all of you were really systematic. One can see that you are really great professors. And in the second round of questions, I would maybe like to invite you to be maybe a bit more concise. And also, if you want to refer to some of the answers of the other professors, that you would maybe like to add something from your perspective. But let me start with Professor Demiri. I was very intrigued in these days in Lovran. I'm participating in the workshop of Professor Gustafsson, and she was mentioning that in Sweden, when you mention the word religion to an ordinary person, what comes to their mind is 9/11. I think it's not only the case in Sweden, it's the case also in many other contexts, because, as we were saying, we are all becoming more and more secularized. But Professor Demiri, I would like to hear your opinion or your advice, how to show the importance of faith, of religion in ours today's so secularized societies.
Thank you. Well, obviously, I'm an academic and not a community leader or a politician. So as a theologian and academic, I can only comment on texts and theological and religious concepts and ideas. So therefore, I would like to stress that we need to differentiate between the mainstream of world religions and their extremes. So we need to distinguish between Islamism and mainstream Islamic beliefs. Likewise, we do not judge, for instance, Christianity by the statements of the Russian Orthodox Church, who declared that the current war in Ukraine is a holy war. Likewise, we do not judge Hinduism by the statements or acts of the Hindutva nationalists, for instance. So this is an important thing that we need to keep in mind. And also, we need to remember that most horrors of the last 100 years were the result of secular and not religious ideologies. Also, coming back to the second part of your question, faith is normal and natural for humanity, and it is associated with positive family and mental health outcomes, especially in societies where we have loneliness, one of the epidemics being a modern epidemic. Just today I was reading that in Germany, according to surveys, every fifth person lives alone. There are about 17 million people living on their own, alone. In countries such as the UK, they have even created a ministry of loneliness. So this is an epidemic. Therefore, the role of religion is in those areas. There is a lot that religious traditions can offer. And therefore, also many people are searching for meaning of life, for spirituality, and they are very often interested in religions and what religions can offer. So therefore, I believe religions need to be ready to support them and all those who are interested to approach.
Thank you. And let me stick to these difficult, challenging questions. Professor Gustafsson, Sweden was in recent decades considered as a model of successful welfare state. Nowadays, we hear the news about unsuccessful integration of migrants, gang wars, violence on the streets. What went wrong, and what can we as faithful, as Christians, as theologians learn from it?
And now you want me to be short. in my answer. Well, thank you. First of all, I think the way you pose the question, you blame migration. I think there's a problem connected to that, because one should know that Sweden has a long time experience of receiving refugees and migrants among all many groups from your parts, I mean the Balkan countries. And I think that there are both statistics, and I also can share personal anecdotes of a very successful integration of these groups. And these groups are not alone. There are also other groups that you would say made their way very constructively into the Swedish society. Now, the welfare state, I mean, it has this success, I would still say, has, of course, to do with a welfare system that was built up in a very different context from the one we see today, not only in terms of a changed demography with migrant groups coming into our countries, but also a totally different situation with an idea of a never-ending technological innovation and optimism connected to that, to economical growth, and an economical growth that was totally maneuvered by a social democratic political party where social justice was one of its main cores. And today we see neoliberalism together in combination with late capitalism, of nations being very dependent on what's going on globally. I would say both economically and normatively. Why is, I mean, every day Sweden is informed about Trump's new ideas. I mean, we are drawn into, all of us, a situation which doesn't really, I think, yes, we have challenges, but those challenges are not solved by Sweden itself. Rather, the other day, one of these leaders of one of the networks that has been very, very active was captured and put in jail in Turkey. And it's thanks to cooperation and openness and trust that this can happen. So yes, there are problems, but there is also a very great history of welcoming people from other contexts. And I realize that this can sound very confident, but I think it's important to show that there are these stories of wonderful corporations and how the idea of what a Swede is has expanded and in very constructive ways. Still, today, given those new, both economical and global mechanisms and aspects, we need a new Marshall Plan. You know, after the Second World War, we had this Marshall Plan, a new vision and new ways, I think, that we have to cooperate around on how to lower and at the best reduce or even diminish these violent ways of human interaction that we now see, and we see it very close, as you say.
Thank you. You were sharing quite challenging social, political, economical issues. I find it also very interesting how many people, many Christians, many faithful, simply fail to see that the church should be involved in these issues, in social, economic, ecological, and other issues, but only in maybe faith and morality. So, Professor Massironi, I would like to ask you, how to put in practice that invitation of Second Vatican Council to make the struggles of the world our struggles? And how can maybe the synodal method help us to become more open towards others?
Yeah, we can say there are no faith and morality without involving ourselves in everyday life. There is unmorality when we attend worship without celebrating and receiving God's point of view and God invite to go outside, transforming with Him the whole reality. So I think it's really important to know that, for example, ecological consciousness is not something new or a social topic. When we confess, I believe in God Creator, ecological consciousness is a dogmatic question, is a dogmatic topic, is your idea of belonging to creation. And so if you don't care of creation, of climate changing, you are so far from you are celebrating, you are confessing. So it is a topic of faith, not social justice. Social justice has to be nourished from our approaches, which are nourished by faith. And so I think we need a strong dialogue inside the church, because partial vision, ideological approaches still exist. Maybe in the first centuries they would be called heresies. Gnosticism is an heresy, and traditionalism today is a form of Gnosticism. Pelagianism is an heresy, and some kind of progressism is a form of Pelagianism. So we can go in deep in our beliefs and try to understand the deep connections between what we celebrate, what we confess, and the world we are living in.
Thank you. And I would like to continue about one very special but important social questions that we are facing in our region here. But before that, we will now again skip to the Croatian and Serbian language. So those of you that need the device, please turn it on. Profesore Perišiću, u Srbiji i dalje traju prosvjedi studenata protiv vlasti. Crkva se spram tog pitanja postavila dvojako, pravoslavna crkva, kako se barem čini iz naših medija. Čini se da hijerarhija optužuje prosvjednike za obojenu revoluciju, dok s druge strane među prosvjednicima su i studenti teologije. Kako vi gledate na tu situaciju?
Pa vidite, teolog može, a ja bi mu preporučio da ostane neutralan kad su u pitanju međustranačka trvenja i čisto političke borbe. Međutim, kad su u pitanju osnovne demokratske i šta više ljudske vrijednosti, onda on niti može, niti smije da ostane po strani. Kada oni koji su u jednoj državi na vlasti, kada poništavaju vrijednosti na kojima treba da počiva svako normalno društvo, kako teolog može da ostane neangažovan? A on, kao i cjelokupna crkva, ne postoji izvan tog društva. Ako se u tom društvu uništava pravda kompromitovanjem pravosudnog sistema, pa onda je neće biti ni za hrišćane. Ako se u njemu promoviše korupcija, ona neće zaobići ni crkvu. Ako vlast organizovano i sistematski uništava obrazovni sistem, onda će i hrišćani u tom društvu ostati polupismeni i time podložni najgorem ideološkom ispiranju mozga i fanatizovanju protiv neistomišljenika. Jednom riječju, ako cjelokupno društvo klizi u propast, i to ne samo od sebe, nego organizovanjem, nastojanjem kriminalizovane vlasti, onda je dužnost teologa, kao i svakog intelektualca i iole svjesnog čovjeka, da pokuša da tome stane na put kako zna i umije. Iako su se u Srbiji protiv takve korumpirane i kriminalizovane vlasti konačno podigli studenti, evo već 8 mjeseci, i umjesto nje traže vladavinu prava, funkcionalne institucije, slobodne medije, odgovornost za zločin i tako dalje. Reklo bi se najnormalnije stvari. Teolog to mora podržati. Makar se vrh crkve iz samo njemu znanih razloga stavio u službu jedne takve nedostojne vlasti. Jer teolog nije u službi crkve, kako se to obično kaže. Teolog je u službi istine i pravde. Za teologa istina mora biti svetinja. Znači, istina je svetinja. On je u službi istine i pravde, koji je vrh crkve, kad je onakav kakav treba da bude, može zagovarati, ali kada nije, onda i ne mora. Kao što je sad izgleda slučaj. To, međutim, ne smije da sprečava teologa da u takvom slučaju on to čini u ime crkve kao savjest i korektiv njenog posrnulog vrha. Ne bi bilo prvi put u istoriji da je crkva u službi vladajuće ideologije koja je suprotna evanđelju. Dešavalo se to i ranije. Ali upravo u tome je uloga slobodno mislećih teologa, da proročki, hrabro, ne obazirujući se na moguće posljedice, jer treba udovoljiti Bogu, a ne ljudima, da on podsjeća crkvu da je njeno mjesto ne na strani korumpirane vlasti, nego na strani obespravljenog naroda i njegovog najboljeg i najperspektivnijeg dijela, to je akademska omladina. S kim će crkva biti i koga će podržati, ako ne one, dakle studente, sad već i građane, koji traže pravedno društvo, poštene, znači nenamještene izbore, vladavinu prava, odgovornost za učinjeno i propušteno, medije koji informišu, a ne dezinformišu u ime kriminalnog kartela koji je zarobio državu i paralisao društvo. Ne bih rekao da je izbor baš toliko težak da teolog mora da podsjeća vrh crkve šta mu je zadatak i čiju stranu treba da podrži. I ne pomaže tu nikakva demagogija da crkva ne treba da dijeli narod, nego da su njoj svi isti i tako dalje. Niti su isti, niti mogu biti isti. Lopovi pokradeni, ubice i ubijeni, onaj koji prosvjetljuje i onaj koji zamračuje, istinoljubivi i lažljivi, onaj koji oslobađa i onaj ko robljuje, dobronamjerni, zlonamjerni i tako dalje. Ne mogu biti isti. Dakle, izbor je i suviše lak da bi se crkva pretvarala da ga ne razumije ili da je kobajagi iznad njega. No, u ovako lakim slučajevima čak je i neutralnost itekako svrstavanje. U srpskom slučaju ovog puta, nažalost, nedostojno.
Hvala lijepa. Ovako hrabre i plemenite riječi podsjećaju me na važnost uloge teologije u našem društvu i to je zapravo ono o čemu ovih dana na ovim susretima i govorimo. Uz obljetnice koje smo do sada spomenuli, i lokalna riječka crkva ove godine slavi važnu obljetnicu 100 godina od osnutka biskupije. No i ovdje u Rijeci, profesore Medved, vi ste odavdje, kao i drugdje u ostalom, čini se da je sve manji interes studenata za studij teologije, ali općenito za humanističke studije. I čini se da smo onda u opasnosti da ostanemo bez ovog jednog kritičnog govora koji je toliko važan, vidimo to u našem suvremenom društvu. Što se može učiniti u takvoj situaciji? Što možda vi ovdje kao riječka crkva činite? Znam da ste i vi osobno involvirani u mnoge aktivnosti, pa možete li nam reći, podijeliti s nama, dati nekakav savjet, neko ohrabrenje možda za kraj, što možemo učiniti svi mi kako bi teologija ostala relevantna, kako bi nas i dalje izgrađivala i obogaćivala?
Ne znam jesam li sposoban izreći ohrabrenje, ali evo pokušat ću nešto reći. Ne krijem da nisam još prežalio zatvaranje teologije u Rijeci kao područnog studija KBF-a u Zagrebu, zatvaranje koje se dogodilo zbog malog broja studenata, ali nažalost nismo uspjeli niti to pretvoriti u neki institut, percipirajući da bi bilo itekako važno imati jednu znanstvenu ustanovu teološku, ali tako je nažalost stanje. U prvom redu ovdje s moje lijeve strane sjedi profesor Ivan Šarčević koji u jednom članku vrlo dobro opisao da je za vjeru potrebna teologija, jer vjera bez teologije postaje primitivna. Vjera bez teologije može biti i opasna kako za pojedinca, tako i za zajednicu. Znam da nema možda i nikakvu težinu pozivati se na neke povijesne podatke, ali ću se ipak pozvat. Znači, ta ustanova teologije u Rijeci je nastala 1947. kao jedan od prvih fakulteta u biti u Rijeci. A ako se vratimo u raniji novi vijek, Stanko, tvoji Isusovci su ovdje dobili 1633. dozvolu podjeljivanja diploma. Neću računati koliko je to prije Zagreba, ali to je prije nekih 25 godina prije Zagreba. Što se tiče obilježavanja 100-godišnjice biskupije, nastojat ću biti kratak, možda i neskromno mogu reći da smo i na polju historiografije i na polju javne memorije nekako, čini mi se, učinili iskorak s kojim se možemo pohvaliti možda i pred nekim drugim sredinama u Hrvatskoj. najčešće se je povijest te biskupije uvijek promatrala viktimološki. Znači Hrvati su uvijek gledali na tih 100 godina selektivno gledajući one momente kad su oni bili žrtve, a bili su žrtve u prvom razdoblju za vrijeme fašističke vlasti. A s druge strane Talijani su na tu povijest gledali kao žrtve nakon 45. kada su otišli. Čini mi se da smo možda uspjeli i u, kažem, toj historiografskim dijelima, da tako kažem, a i na razini javne memorije, integrirati, nadići ono zlo pamćenje, nadići ono što se vrlo često događa da se selektivno pamti. Ja pamtim samo ono što meni ide u korist, a ono drugo što meni ne ide u korist, to ću naprosto preskočiti. I rekao bih možda stanko i ovo, zadnjih smo tjedana, mjeseci puno govorili o papi Franji, pa smo govorili da je on među ostalim volio govoriti da se sa margina stvarnost ispravnije vidi. Mogu nekako preformulirati to na način da možda se i sa graničnih područja i sa više nacionalnih područja danas može lakše prepoznat, mogu se lakše prepoznat neke opasnosti u koje srljamo, odnosno rast nacionalizama, rast te prakse podizanja zidova i zatvaranja. Kao povjesničar želim reći, samo upozoriti, podsjetiti da su nacionalizmi doveli do dva svjetska rata. Zamolio si me da dam ohrabrenje, možda na kraju da kažem, ne znam, drago mi je da je biskup Mate ovdje došao prije, evo koliko, 5 godina, zato što, pa makar bio on i u manjini u Hrvatskoj, ali vrijeme će pokazati da je u pravu, a u čemu je to u pravu? Da crkva danas može navještati evanđelje jedino u ovom modernom vremenu, jedino kroz koncil i sinodalna vrata. Samo koncil i danas sinodalna crkva su vrata kroz koja se može uspješno djelovati, pa makar i uz otpore, pa makar nekad i uz nerazumijevanja, ali u povijesti je uvijek, u crkvenoj povijesti uvijek bilo tako, manje više.
Thank you very much, Marko. Thank you very much, all the professors. I think I speak for all when I say that you enriched us very much with your answers, with your talks this evening. As Marko was saying, since 1633, Jesuits were able to issue diplomas. As a Jesuit, I really issue you diploma for passing this test this evening with greatest marks. Thank you very much.